Working the overnight shift at a 24-hour CVS was never my dream job, but it paid the bills. I'd been at this location for 3 years, gradually working my way up the ladder. Taking on the midnight to 8 a.m. shift seemed like a good career move. My boss appreciated my willingness, and I figured it couldn't hurt to stay on their good side. After all, once the pharmacy opened at 9 a.m., business picked up. But during the graveyard hours, it was quiet, too quiet. One person was enough to man the register and handle restocking duties. The store's automatic door chime would alert me if a customer entered, giving me plenty of time to get to the register. It was an uneventful night like most others. A couple of hours into my shift, I wandered back to the register to check my phone, which was charging nearby. I noticed a voicemail from an unknown number. Curiosity got the better of me, and I listened. The voice on the other end was strange, low, garbled, and almost impossible to decipher. It sounded like a bad recording with no transcription available. I shook it off as a spam call. Who doesn't get those? Tossing my phone aside, I returned to stocking shelves. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out to see a string of texts from the same unknown number. Call back when you can. I know you're at work. I'm coming to visit. What time are you working until? My stomach tightened. This wasn't some random scammer. Someone knew where I was. I quickly texted back. Who is this? The typing bubble appeared and lingered for what felt like an eternity before disappearing without a reply. I stared at my phone, waiting for another text that never came. Uneasy but determined not to let it distract me, I returned to my tasks. Hours passed, and I had almost convinced myself it was some kind of joke. Then, around 2 a.m., the chime of the front door echoed through the store. I made my way to the register, expecting to see a late-night customer. The aisles were empty. I waited a few minutes, glancing at the security monitors, but no one appeared. Shrugging it off, I went back to stocking shelves in the beauty section. As I pushed my cart down the second aisle, I caught sight of someone in the next one, over a woman standing in the far corner. "Ma'am, do you need any help?" I called out. She didn't respond, just stood there with her back to me, staring at a shelf. Her body was rigid, almost unnatural. After a few awkward seconds, I decided to leave her alone and return to the register. Not long after, my phone buzzed again. More texts from the unknown number. The messages came rapid fire, one after another. Most were gibberish, but one stood out. "I'm here." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My breathing quickened as I called the number. The ringing echoed not from my phone, but from inside the store. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. The sound was coming from the aisles, near where I'd seen the woman. Forcing myself to move, I canceled the call and approached cautiously. As I rounded the corner, she was still there, standing in the same spot. Her head turned slightly, just enough for me to see part of her face. She smiled. Blood trickled down her cheeks, and her eyes had a wild, almost manic glint. Her lips stretched unnaturally, as if she'd cut the corners of her mouth. Then she let out a laugh, a choked, garbled sound that sent chills down my spine. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, yelling, "Stay away from me. I'm calling the police." She didn't flinch. Her grin widened. My voice cracked as I shouted, "This isn't funny. Get out of here." But deep down, I knew this wasn't a prank. Her eyes were too empty, her smile too deliberate. I bolted back to the counter, my hands shaking as I dialed my best friend's number. He picked up on the first ring. "Dude, someone's in the store." "She's acting crazy," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "What do you mean, crazy?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I hesitated. How could I explain the blood, the smile? "She's just not right. I think she's dangerous. Call the cops," he urged. Don't mess around. After a few minutes of silence, I peeked out. The aisles were empty. I checked the security monitors to confirm she was gone before calling the police. When the officers arrived, I showed them the texts and the CCTV footage. They recognized her immediately. She was a local woman with a history of severe mental illness, recently released from a psychiatric facility. Apparently, she had fixated on me through social media, where I had unknowingly shared too much personal information. The officers promised to patrol the area for the rest of the night and advised me to lock all the doors. I blocked her number and deleted my public contact information from social media. It's been weeks since that night, and I've switched to the day shift. The memory of her bloodied smile still haunts me, a constant reminder to never let my guard down even in the most ordinary places. Before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time, make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for the next stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. I used to work at a grocery store, managing the dairy section. Let me tell you, it was the worst job I ever had. The work was exhausting, constant heavy lifting, dealing with expired dairy products, and spending hours in a freezing cold cooler. The dairy cooler was tucked away in the back of the store, near the storage area where all the unshelved groceries were kept. It was a perfect hideout because the supervisors rarely bothered to check back there. To stay warm, I'd bring a thick hoodie and just sit there, killing time when things got slow. One night, everything changed. It was a quiet Thursday night, and I was scheduled to work until 10 p.m. The store emptied out by 9, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. The supervisor on duty, Mr. Senko, was the worst. He micromanaged everything, always breathing down everyone's neck. After restocking the milk cartons for what I hoped was the last time that evening, I took the empty crates to the back. I figured I'd hide out in the dairy cooler for the final hour of my shift. As I approached the cooler, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. Through the glass door of the cooler, I saw a face staring at me. It was only for a split second before it disappeared, either ducking down or fading out of view. My heart skipped a beat. Who could possibly be in there? I cautiously opened the cooler door, bracing myself for the blast of icy air. The loud hum of the industrial refrigerator filled my ears as I stepped inside. The room was a maze of stacked boxes, pallets, and crates of milk. There were plenty of places for someone to hide, but I didn't see anyone. Trying to shake off the unsettling feeling, I did what I usually did. I found an empty milk crate, positioned myself behind a pile of boxes, and sat down. I pulled out my phone to pass the time, but I couldn't focus. That face I'd seen through the glass kept replaying in my mind. Was it a customer who had wandered back here by mistake? Maybe another employee messing with me? But no one else was scheduled to work in the back that late. Then, the lights in the cooler went out. The sudden darkness was suffocating. The only light came from the faint glow outside the glass door. My first thought was that Mr. Senko had figured out I was hiding and turned off the lights to force me out. Annoyed and a little nervous, I stood up, ready to confront him. But as I stepped out from behind the boxes, I froze. A tall, dark silhouette stood just a few feet in front of me, blocking part of the light coming through the cooler doors. My breath caught in my throat. This figure was massive, at least a foot taller than me. It couldn't be Mr. Senko. He was short and stocky, not towering like this. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of an impossibly tall person standing eerily still. Before I could react, the lights flickered back on. The figure was gone. I blinked, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked cautiously to where the figure had been, waving my hand through the air as if trying to prove to myself that nothing had been there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My skin crawled, and an inexplicable fear rooted me to the spot. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. No response. The only sound was the relentless hum of the refrigerator. I felt a sudden urge to get out of there. I pushed through the cooler doors and shut off the lights behind me, but something compelled me to take one last look. I peeked through the glass, expecting to see nothing. Instead, I saw it again. The same tall silhouette stood in the cooler, motionless. My chest tightened, and a wave of panic washed over me. I turned and bolted, throwing off my apron as I ran. I didn't care if Mr. Senko would yell at me for leaving early. I just needed to get out. The aftermath when I got home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Was it a trick of the light? My mind playing games with me? Or had I really seen something, someone? I considered asking my coworkers if they'd ever experienced anything strange in the dairy cooler, but I was too embarrassed. What if they thought I was crazy? A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I did some digging online, searching for anything about the grocery store's history. What I found left me shaken. Years ago, before the store was built, the land had been the site of a small factory. According to local lore, a worker had died there in a gruesome accident. Some claimed his restless spirit lingered, though most dismissed the stories as urban legends. Still, the details were chilling. The worker had been described as exceptionally tall. Unfinished business side decided to talk to one of the older employees, Maria, who had been at the store for over a decade. She was the kind of person who seemed to know everything about everyone. "Maria, has anything weird ever happened in the dairy cooler?" I asked hesitantly. Her eyes narrowed. "Why do you ask?" I hesitated before recounting my experience. To my surprise, she didn't laugh. Instead, she nodded slowly. "You're not the first to see him," she said. "Him. The tall man. People have been seeing him for years, mostly in the cooler. That's why some of the night shift workers refuse to go back there alone." A chill ran down my spine. "Who do you think he is?" Maria shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe he's tied to the old factory. Or maybe he's just something else. But one thing's for sure, he doesn't like people in his space." A lingering presence after that conversation. I couldn't bring myself to go near the dairy cooler again. I started looking for another job, and within a few weeks, I was out of there for good. But the experience stayed with me. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream about that tall figure standing silently in the shadows. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, the oppressive cold that seemed to seep into my very bones, and the haunting realization that I had stepped into someone's territory, someone who wasn't ready to leave. If you ever find yourself working late in an empty store, and sometimes those secrets are watching you. Working overnight stocking shifts for various Lowe's home improvement stores isn't exactly glamorous, but it's steady work. My job takes me to whichever store needs me the most that night. Some nights it's quiet, almost peaceful. Other nights, well, let's just say I've seen my share of strange things. But this one particular night still haunts me. That evening, I was assigned to a store about 30 minutes from my house. Paul, the trucker on duty, was my only company. We unloaded the night's shipment together and sorted everything in the back room. Paul didn't stick around long. He had another pickup to do. That left me alone to finish the night's work, nothing unusual for me. I was used to working solo. My routine was straightforward. Scan the new shipments to take inventory, load items onto a cart, and then stock them on the floor. Everything was going smoothly. The store was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional sound of boxes shifting in the warehouse. I was scanning a pallet of tools when a deafening crash made me jump out of my skin. Spinning around, I saw that a large box had fallen from a towering stack of pallets. The box hadn't burst open, so I figured it was just poorly stacked. Grumbling, I grabbed the forklift to lift the box back into place. As I worked, I noticed a strange odor hanging in the air. It was faint but distinct, like a mix of mildew and something sour. Warehouses aren't exactly known for their fresh scents, so I shrugged it off and continued. Later that night, I was stocking shelves in the paint aisle when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. At the far end of the aisle, someone was walking. They were dressed in dark clothes, definitely not a uniform. My heart skipped a beat. No one else was supposed to be in the store. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty space. The person turned their head, and when they saw me, they bolted. They darted down an intersecting aisle and disappeared. Adrenaline surged through me as I took off after them, calling out again. But by the time I reached the intersection, they were gone. I ran down the main aisle, scanning each side aisle as I passed, but there was no sign of them. Grabbing my phone, I called everyone who might possibly be on duty, but no one picked up. I was completely alone. Unease settled over me as I made my way back to the warehouse. As soon as I walked through the doors, another crash rang out from the back section. My stomach dropped. It came from the same pile of pallets where the first box had fallen. I rushed over, my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Another box had tumbled to the floor. I stared up at the towering stack of pallets, trying to figure out what was causing them to fall. Then, I noticed something odd. The arrangement of the boxes wasn't random. They formed a sort of wall, creating a hollow space in the middle. Grabbing a ladder, I climbed up to get a better look. When I peered over the edge, my breath caught in my throat. Inside the hollow was a makeshift nest, a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and bottles. And sitting right there in the middle was the man I had seen earlier. He was filthy, his clothes torn and caked with grime. The sour smell I'd noticed earlier hit me full force. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stood up, his posture stiff and menacing. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You can't be here." He didn't say a word. Instead, he lunged toward me. I scrambled down the ladder, nearly slipping in my haste. Once I was low enough, I jumped off and bolted down the aisle. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't stop running until I was out of the warehouse and back on the main floor. Shaking, I called 911 and explained the situation. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived. 2 officers showed up and swept the warehouse, but by the time they reached the makeshift hideout, it was empty. The man had vanished, taking his belongings with him. Later, when we reviewed the security footage, we discovered that he had been living in the warehouse for at least a week. He'd been sneaking in through a side door and hiding in his little fortress of boxes. No one had noticed because no one ever checked the cameras unless something went wrong. The footage showed him moving through the aisles late at night, gathering supplies, and even watching me from the shadows as I worked. That realization sent a chill down my spine. He'd been there the whole time, silently observing me. The store manager tightened security after that, and I never worked at that location again. But even now, whenever I'm alone in a warehouse or a store late at night, I can't shake the feeling that someone might be watching.